Cultural genocide. Is there an African Christian or a real Islamic spirituality? Can you be an authentic Christian or Muslim and champion real African liberation at the same time? Since our ancestors are so basic to the African sense of selfhood and society, do we really worship our ancestors? These are some of the questions that we have to deal with today. Africans committing cultural genocide kill ancestors first. But how? You may be the murderer of your own ancestors. Conversion. When an African becomes a Christian, they can no longer be an African. There is no way one can be an African and at the same time be a Christian, because the concepts and the spirits are totally different and opposite. They do not mix. One has to dominate the other. When Africans were captured and brought to America by the Europeans, they often attributed the European powers to the power of the European god. Therefore, it's often easy for some and the men who were enslaved to begin to yearn to love that victorious and powerful God other than their own gods. The same thing with Islam. Islam is not an African religion. This is how Africans became Muslims, the same way they became Christians. The true dynamics within Islam, within the Quran, within the current practice, is that the Arab is the master and the African is the slave, abed. African enslavement is still practiced in many Arabic countries. Slavery is rampant, and slavery has not been denied. Martin Luther King, did he commit cultural genocide? Can anyone be an African and a Christian at the same time, or a Muslim and an African at the same time? Can you be an authentic Christian or an authentic Muslim and champion real African liberation like Malcolm X? Since ancestors are so basic to the African sense of selfhood and society, do we really worship them? Martin Luther King Jr., here's what he said. He said, we must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. There is some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. So is he saying we should love those who commit heinous, brutal crime against us? Is this the way? Black people unknowingly revere biblical and Quranic ancestors, and this blindness causes the death and murder of their own ancestry. Genesis 2:4, it says these are the generations. This means the history. In Genesis 5:1, it says the book of the generations. I want you to capture this. I want you to understand this, to put this in the context and to remember this, because what we are going to demonstrate on how we murder our own ancestors is directly connected to this, what I am saying, what I am reading here from the Bible, especially since many millions of Africans are Christians and millions of Africans are Muslims. This applies to us in philosophy, in daily life, in practice. So these books that I'm reading and I'm showing here have generations, in other words, generating genes. So these are real people, or these are created entities. In this age, Psalms 49 says the generation of his fathers equals the dwelling of his fathers. In other words, it's the grave. So when Christians follow this, they follow other graves, and their grave of their ancestors is left unattended. Psalm 73:50 says, the generation of thy children, which is equals the contemporary race. So when you become a Christian, you become a new race. You are no longer an African. You cannot remain an African and be a Christian with this generation, with this grave, with this new ancestry. So who shall declare this generation? His manner of life, who shall declare, or rather his race, posterity shall be so numerous that no one shall be able to declare it. So in Matthew 1:17, he says the word means a succession or series of persons from the same stock. Generation of vipers or brood of vipers, same stock. And also the spirit. This generation, the persons who are living contemporarily with Christ. In other words, whether Christ is real or whether Christ was created artificially, when you become a Christian, you are no longer an African. If you agree that, therefore, that's all right. So it says a chosen generation. In other words, you have been chosen out of the Africans and you have been put in another generation. So it goes on to list all that. So when you become in this state, you can no longer claim to be an African. When you become a Muslim, you can no longer become you can no longer continue being an African. You have committed cultural genocide. And so, like Kunta Kinte says, your new name is Toby. When they say that and you accept that and you go by that name, it also means that your new religion is now Christianity. It's no longer African. When you become a Christian, you are no longer an African. You have committed cultural genocide. You have committed cultural suicide. You have killed yourself. You have died. You are a new creation. You have been indoctrinated. You have a belief in many other concepts, primarily in the promise of heaven instead of Nikadzim of or ancestral world. You have a belief in Jesus instead of a belief in an ancestor, original ancestor, created by the creator of our ancestor, so-called God by others. Or ancestors. You get a new name, you get holidays, and you have delinked yourself from self. This is Christianity. This is cultural genocide by ourselves with our own efforts and our own minds. We have murdered ourselves. We have committed spiritual suicide. But others have come in and have contributed largely to that. Foreigners murder and brutalizes our dead ancestors by digging up their graves, bringing them out and displaying them in public, which is taboo to us. So they've gone on and knocked off the nose. Why did they knock the nose? Because we know that through the nose, that's where the spirit of life, the spirit of African ancestry goes through. That's why even the tobacco, the snuff, you put it in the nose to invite and to... They also chop off the beards, because the beards are the connection. They point to the earth, to Mother Earth. They display that you are a man. They knock off the nose. Here they pulled out the eyes and bashed them out. They chopped the nose off. These are African ancestors in ancient Africa, in a place that we call Egypt today. They also damaged it and artificially attack statues. These are foreigners. So foreigners have contributed to our cultural genocide, to our cultural death, to our ancestral death. They die again, our ancestors. They've died many times. They have been killed many times. This is real. This is happening through taboos, through these actions that I'm showing here. So 4,300 years old, a smashed statue head shows a non-Egyptian pharaoh, a non-African. You can read more here. Why would they smash that? Because they are committing cultural genocide. Many African scholars and others have erroneously distorted African culture by mislabeling one of the pillars of African reality, which is ancestor, by calling it ancestor worship and calling it a heathen lifestyle. In this ideological frame of reference, it creates a soft landing for millions of black Africans to easily commit African cultural suicide, leading to massive, irreparable cultural genocide by ourselves through the scholastic work of our own people, whom we think must be trusted to teach us the truth, to teach us reality, not belief, not opinion, not faith, but real tangible facts. So when you go into the Bible, you find that the Bible says, do not worship any other gods besides me. Which God is this? That's the problem. African scholars then bring Jesus. African scholars then brings Muhammad. African scholars then brings technology. African scholars then brings atheism. That becomes a God. And we delink ourselves from ourselves. The Quran says, and your Lord has ordained that you should not worship anyone except him. But yet, when you go to the Hajj, there is a stone that you move round and round. There are places that you hold holy, which we cannot besmirch, which we cannot destroy, other than causing a jihad or a war. Why? Because you have been de-linked to yourself, because these people are creating artificial points. Christianity creates artificial points to capture, to enslave, to put us in prison, and to de-link us from our own tradition and reality. Culture, a technical term used by anthropologists to refer to a system for creating, sending, storing, and processing information developed by human beings, which differentiates them from other life forms. So Africans have their own culture. Africans have their own method. Our ancestors created this system which we call culture. That was Hall 1990. Here is Hofstede, again 1984. He says, culture is to human collectivity what personality is to the individual. So Culture is the personality of our race. Without the personality of our race, we are not a person, we are nothing, we are artificial. Priestley, 1993. These are scholars, European scholars. They say culture consists of ideals, values, and assumptions about life that are widely shared among people and that guide specific behaviors. So when our specific behaviors is no longer guided by our African ideals, African values, African assumptions, African life, we are no longer Africans. There is no way Martin Luther remained an African. There is no way Malcolm X was an African. He spoke well, he fought well, he did well, but the mere fact that Malcolm X was a Muslim, the mere fact that Martin Luther was a Christian, and any other leader who is not an African traditionalist, right deep in their core, anybody, either a Freemason, an Illuminati member, or anybody, they are no longer an African. We can no longer follow them. That's clear. That's what this is saying. Think about this seriously. So we have committed spiritual suicide. We have already defined what is cultural genocide. Cultural genocide is when there is a thoughtful obliteration of the cultural tradition of people using covert or overt military, party political, religious, philosophical, ethical, or racial reasons. This has been done on Africans, by Africans and by others. It's difficult, it's hard to stand up to this. So these structures, do they ignore ancestors? This is Stonehenge. These are religious and traditions that tell ancestor worship, revere their ancestors. These people revere their ancestors. Islam reveres its ancestors. Christianity reveres its ancestors. See, the buildings, these structures are not mere simple structures. And this is the mosque. And this is Stonehenge. They revere this. And yet Africans do not revere their own, the pyramid, the Great Zimbabwe. They do not. No. They follow this. So they have committed, we have committed cultural genocide. We are dead. We are killing our ancestors. Now, ancestors constitute the birthright of those who come after them. Our African story is the origin of human story. For our ancestors were the first humans. They gave birth to history. For no one else was present when history was born. Our ancestors invented history and society, and therein, which is their legacy to us and our inheritance from them, we truly come into being through our ancestors. And if we appear tall in these or any other generations, it is so because we at least stand part on the shoulders of our ancestors. Ignoring our ancestors is cultural genocide. It's murder. These are our ancestors. Atum or Atema, creator god. Atema means black, means dark, means melanin, means carbon. Shu is the spirit, the air that we breathe in. The breath of life. Tefnat, God, Gav is Guv or Ivu is earth. Nute is the sky. Ausari is the underworld. Isis is our mother. Nephthys and Set is our negative side. Heru is us, the descendants, the gods. So, what about you? How many ancestors do you know? Both your maternal and paternal. Is it important? The more ancestors you know, do you realize the deeper your roots, the more connected to God you are? After you trace your ancestry, use totems to identify your nature or your God. This is your key to God. Atema the Amen. Now, most of our African leaders who have proved believe that they have become modernized. Many Africans have mistaken Westernization or Islamization for modernization. They forget that ancestors are the spiritual, ideological, social, psychological, biological, and material foundation of an African society. Africans were the first to inhabit the earth. Fossil records as well as DNA analysis give scientific evidence to support this. Second important fact about ancestors is this: ancestors pass on to their inheritors part of their spiritual aspects, also including the spirit, the soul, two vital forces within each individual and in collective. In addition, ancestors are also the origin of social, institutional, historical, and indeed all other aspects of cultural heritage, and so our identity. We must think we must ask questions. It is clear that we have contributed in the murder of our ancestors. We have all in a way committed grievous spiritual evil as well as violence, physical violence. What must we do? Yes, we need to do something here. Get right knowledge. Know how to stop that negativity. Know how to reset, shatter or set within us. How to avoid continuously murdering our ancestors. Church and Mosque causes you to forget your ancestors. The instant you family say you believe in Jesus or Allah is God or anything other than what is really yours, you automatically cut your ancestral linkage. You then reconnect to an artificial ancestral line. You can find that ancestral line in the Bible or in the Quran or in the Hadiths. You become an adopted individual of that line. You are a convert. You are a believer. You are a new creation. You get a new name. That's why you get a new name and a new ancestry. There are rituals that will make you follow that. Passover, going to the Hajj. All those rituals are there to completely take you over. There are no Africans that are true or real Christians. It is impossible. It's a belief, not a reality. For there was no Christian or Muslim ancestor. All those lists in books were crafted by humans. Remembering is coming together to your ancestor or ancestors. These lists are artificial. Your belief makes them real, yet they are fake. No wonder faith is belief without proof. Why don't they want you to prove first, then believe after? Calling your African ancestral names wakes you up. For you are the ancestral vessel yourself. Start by building your family trees. You have a base limit or a base minimum of only 2. Your father's ancestral tree and your mother's ancestral tree. Basically, you must know not less than 20 ancestors. A minimum of 10 from each parent. You have 10 fingers and 10 toes. So that makes a lot of sense. Personal vow to self and to remembering ancestors. These African traditional religions, we believe in a single creator. Characteristics of African traditional religion. There exists a remote high God that does not interact with men. Why? Because the physical world is charged with his spiritual energy that influences the flow and ebb of life. This energy should be trapped and tapped by us using many systems which we call rituals like libations. The struggle is constantly to balance Ma'at and appease the spiritual forces to avert disaster and elicit blessings. That's African. That's us. So that's how we can restore. That's how we can do. The living dead are involved still in the daily lives and affairs of our village life. That's what we are. Thank you, Siyabonga Kakulu. Twalumba, as priest teacher Rabbi Elem Tumizulu of Committee Hebrew Ethics. Subscribe to our channel. Also visit us on livespiritofament.com, our website. These are our contact email address. This is our time to walk with God again. Goodbye.